Hey class, let's begin our comma unit. It's a very important unit that we're going to cover, because the comma is the most frequently used mark of punctuation. It's used mainly to group words that belong together or to separate words that don't belong together. You can think of them like a yield sign in as far as traffic driving. Or the yellow portion of a traffic light. What does the yellow caution light mean or signal to drivers? It means to slow down. And just like the comma, if you can associate that same concept with a comma, it tells the reader to slow down, to kind of pause briefly. And so they're a very important portion of written communication. And so we're going to spend a good bit of time looking at them because they're very important. Let's look at the next slide and start talking about them. And as you can see in these examples, the comma placement matters as well. If you look at the three examples, can you see that commas do make a difference? And if used incorrectly, could create problems. The commas in these sentences alter the meaning of the sentence, and because of their placement. And I wanted to include these examples to remind us that yes, comma placement is very important because they can, to repeat what I said, they can alter the meaning of the sentence where you place them. Okay, use commas to separate items in a series. Example 1, we see here that says, there were books on the floor, posters on the wall, and clothing on the floor. Here we see, as I said at the beginning of the slide, that commas are used to separate words that belong together or bring them together. And this is an example of such how they are separating the ones that don't belong, but grouping the ones together that do belong. In exercise 2, in example 2, it says, they served a tossed salad, spaghetti and meatballs, garlic bread, milk, and fruit. Sounds pretty good. Words customarily used in pairs are set off often items of the series, such as the example of spaghetti and meatballs. Another familiar one would be pork and beans, hat and coat, pen and ink, and those type things. Example number 3, we can go under or over or around it. In this sentence, notice that we have no commas, and there's a reason for that, and that would be the rule that I want to give you. If all of the items in a series are joined by the word or the conjunction and or the conjunction or, such as this sentence, because we have 2 ors in this sentence, right? Okay, do not use commas. So remember, and or no commas if they're joining the items of the series. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Okay, use commas to separate 2 or more adjectives. Like example number 1, she is a creative, intelligent executive. So you have 2 or more adjectives, and you have a comma separating the adjectives creative and intelligent, modifying the noun executive. Let's look at example number 2. Why did you wear the bright red hat? Notice that there's no commas, And the reasoning behind that is that if one item in the series modifies another word in the series, you don't separate them by a comma. Okay, so bright is modifying red, and red is modifying hat, right? The example number 3 is the same concept: Chinese lantern and delicate Chinese. Okay, so no commas between those. All right. The next slide that we will be looking at is going to be about clauses, conjunctions, and between independent clauses, I should say. And so those are the sentences that you use commas in the most because they join compound. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, the next concept that we want to talk about is putting a comma between independent clauses. The rule says use a comma before coordinating conjunctions when they join independent clauses. If you remember the 5 methods of correcting a run-on sentence, one way is to add a coordinating conjunction. You remember the AB Fonzies are fanboys, and when these 7 little words join 2 independent clauses, they must be joined with a comma before the little 7 words. Okay, I mentioned before that when using a comma and a conjunction, that's greatly used. It's in writing, so it's vital to understand the rule and remember it. For those that may be having a little difficulty in proofreading or difficulties with commas in general, I always suggest going through the paper and circling any of those coordinating conjunctions in the paper. You can always then go back and decide, okay, do I need a comma here because this conjunction is followed by an independent sentence? Is it in fact joining 2? And if it does, then you add a comma. If it doesn't, you don't need one. But I would start by locating them because this costs people a lot of points, and it's just a lot of it's through careless errors, and they'll circle it and they see it and they're like, how could I have missed that? And then honestly, that's just one of the ways that I've found that works. If you just go through there and locate all of them in the sentence and just and go back then and go through the process. There are 3 points off if you miss a comma where they're not, put one where they're not supposed to be, or you miss one if it's an essential clause or whatever we'll talk about in a few minutes. But if it's where you have missed putting it because of you didn't catch the idea of them joining 2 independent clauses, then that means that you have left a run-on sentence. Specifically a fused sentence, which means that's a major writing error that will cost 10 points. That's a letter grade. So they're very important. Look at these examples down below. Monday's meeting had gone smoothly, yet I felt controversy brewing. We need a comma there because you have 2 independent sentences, and it's joined by the coordinating conjunction yet. Sam gave me some good advice, and I got some in return. No comma, because got some in return, it's not an independent clause. So, no comma. The next example, Sam gave some good advice, and I gave him some in return. Needs a comma because I gave is a subject and verb, and it is a complete thought. And you have two sentences, and you've got to join them together with a coordinating conjunction and a comma before the conjunction. Always also, if you'll recall, we have talked about, it was in the previous PowerPoint presentation, that coordinating conjunctions, they like all other words, they have meanings. And for example, the first example up here about Monday's meeting had gone smoothly, yet I felt a controversy brewing. Yet is a replacement for the word, but yet is the most unused word of the conjunctions, okay? But what you need to realize is that you need to start using them a little bit more. For example, the word because is the same thing as for. So replace sometimes if you're wanting to use the word because. For example, if you had the sentence, I went back to school, comma, for I want a promotion. That obviously is two independent clauses, and they need the word yet. But you could replace that word for with the word because. All right, and you have the sentence says, I went back to school for or because I wanted a promotion. They interchange with words, and and is the most common conjunction. All of that was covered on a previous PowerPoint, but I just want to make mention of those, tie those rules that were talked about on the PowerPoint when they gave when I gave the definition of the words, if you will, the conjunctions. Now is the time that you apply them when you're going to use one of those words to, in fact, join two independent sentences. Okay, so now we'll move on to non-essential clauses for the next concept, for the comma concepts, and see what we can come up with there. Commas set off non-essential clauses. You know, if something isn't essential, that means that it's non-essential. And in the case of commas, non-essential clauses are not essential to the meaning of the sentence. For example, Sonia Bridges, I'm reading from your PowerPoint slide here. Sonia Bridges, who was offered scholarships to 3 colleges, will go to EMCC in the fall. Down below it, it says, Sonia Bridges is the only senior who won scholarships to 3 colleges. The basic meaning of the sentence, Sonia Bridges will go to EMCC in the fall. Will go to EMCC in the fall isn't affected by the fact that she won or she was offered 3 scholarships, okay? The second example is Sonia Bridges is the only senior who won scholarships to 3 colleges. Here the clause is essential to the meaning of the sentence. Now, we also have participle phrases that are non-essential as well. Don't get bogged down here with the terminology of participle phrases that that may or may give you trouble. Okay, I can't remember what is a participle phrase or whatever. I mentioned that the other day in class. It doesn't matter what you call them. The fact is that you just remember that non-essentials must be set off by commas. For the example, the final 2 examples, the baby, frightened by thunder, climbed into my lap. That is essential. or that is non-essential. So it's set off by commas. The following example, a child frightened by thunder often needs reassurance. Do you see the difference in when you have to put commas around those non-essential elements and when no commas are needed? The non-essential, they break in the flow of the sentence. So that's one way of looking at it, while the ones that are essential, they seem to flow better in the sentence. So non-essential clauses. Let's move on now to introductory elements. They're pretty simple as well. We'll talk about them briefly. Next rule, introductory elements. Use a comma after introductory words such as well, yes, no, and why when they begin a sentence. The example, well, what do you think? These words, if they're at the beginning and they have a comma after them, that signals just a little bit for the reader. The reader is intended to have a little pause after saying them and a little emphasis on the word, okay, and how it's supposed to be read or how it's supposed to be said. Use a comma after introductory participle phrases. There's that word participle phrases again. But I stand by what I've been saying. It doesn't matter what you call them. Doesn't matter. Don't get bogged down in the word participle phrases. You just remember that in this example, giggling like a child, he wrapped the last present. He wrapped the last present needs a comma before it because it's a independent sentence. Giggling like a child, that it would be a phrase fragment. We covered those last week. So the reason why, if you recall, the reason why that I went over them fairly in depth is because I wanted you to see some of the mistakes that the different type of fragments, and this is a prime example, the different mistakes that we make when we're writing, we accidentally commit a phrase fragment. Then at the bottom, or the middle example there, you have cleaning and painting my room was hard but fun. Now, notice there's no comma in that sentence. Why? If you could think through and you look at that sentence, why would there be no comma? Because you've got my room was hard. My room was hard but fun. Okay, well, you've got to have that in there. Number one, that makes no sense, right? The main thing that you need to understand, or you should notice, is that where's the subject of the sentence? See, in this example, the ing at the beginning of the sentence, okay, the cleaning and the painting. What you want to remember, they're not the subjects of the sentence, okay? So it has to do with that, all right? Don't confuse the two, all right? And then, as I said, equally as important, my room was hard but fun. That's not a complete thought. So you got to have something else in it, right? Cleaning and painting explains it. You've added to it to make a sentence. The next example, cleaning and painting my room, comma, I ran across a favorite ring of mine. All right, I ran across a favorite ring of mine. That is a independent sentence. And then the cleaning and painting my room just simply modifies or is a participle phrase, and it is modifying the verb ran. Okay. The next slide we're talking about introductory elements continued, you have those prepositional phrases that we spend a good bit of time on. And they're very important. Always make sure, if you're looking for prepositional phrases at the beginning of the sentence, and a lot of times you'll find them and a lot of times you'll write them, always make sure that you get all of the phrases that are back to back. Make sure you have all of them written and then put your comma. Don't divide the prepositional phrases with commas. For example, look at the string of prepositional phrases in this first example. At the end of the block next to the old railroad station in town, my friends own a house. What is that? Four prepositional phrases in 3 or 4, yeah, in that sentence. There's no commas until you get to the end, and you look for the last noun in that last prepositional phrase, and that's where you're going to put your comma. All right, and then the next example, or the next rule that we want to cover, use a comma after introductory adverb clauses. What is an adverb clause? Well, what you need to remember about an adverb, and you may recall that adverbs, what they do, they express relation, right? Time, number, opposition, affirmation, those things, okay? But they modify adjectives, verbs, and prepositional phrases, okay? That's what adverbs do. Now, there's also, in the examples that we have here, you can remember that the adverb clauses, because if you read this sentence, it's telling you while, you know that's talking about time. It's modifying the flute player, check the sheet music, okay? But what is while? And then down at the bottom, what is as? The bottom definition, or the example. The bottom example, as. They both start with while or as. Those words, you hopefully, when you heard them or you saw them, you should now recognize them, I hope, as subordinate conjunctions. And we said last week that subordinate conjunctions, like they're written here at the beginning of the sentence, while Sal put on his tux, comma, the flute player checked the sheet music. Needs a comma after that because it's at the beginning of the sentence. Had it been reversed and the flute player checked the sheet music while Sal put on his tux, you would not need a comma. Put the subordinate clause at the end. Same thing as the last example. As soon as we left the house, comma, we heard the phone ring. Same concept. We heard the phone ring, no comma, as soon as we left the house. So remember those subordinate clauses. I think the next slide is going to deal with interrupters. Yeah. Use commas to set off an expression unless the expression comes first or last in the sentence. Parenthetical expressions require a semicolon and comma. And then the last rule there about interrupters, words used in direct address are set off by commas. Here's some examples of what we're talking about. Example of a phrase interrupter. An interview with Florence Cohen, comma, the noted landscape architect, comma, will appear Sunday in the Herald, our local paper. Okay, so what what that does. Why do we have commas there? You say, well, is that a non-essential phrase? Is that an essential phrase? You could look at it like that. But what we have here in this particular scenario is we have an appositive phrase. And what appositives do is they explain the noun or the pronoun that they sit beside. So, Florence Cohen, we see she's being explained or identified as the noted landscape architect. All right, that needs setting off by commas. Same thing, our local paper, that's being identified as the Herald, needs a comma. All right. Direct address. Jerry, please close the door. The other example down under, you seem upset, my friend. So those are direct addresses where someone is referred to directly. The example of a parenthetical expression, remember parenthetical expressions, they clarify. They give extra information and they help support the idea. The train will, I am sure, be on time. Just gives a little bit of clarification. I am sure will be on time. And it also, in that example, is helping to support the main idea that the train's going to be on time. It's reiterating the fact, I am sure. Okay? In this example, you have commas rather than semicolon. If you had, let's see, if we had a sentence that said, all right, I'm going to spell that one. Okay, the train is on time. However, that is a rare occurrence. Parenthetical expression, one word, needs setting off by semicolon and a comma. Don't let the idea of, nevertheless, there's some other words that's parenthetical expressions that may have two words. You say, well, I just need a comma before and after. If you have three words, like I am sure, that's a parenthetical expression. You need two commas, okay? The rest of them, you're going to need a semicolon and a comma following it. All right. We're going to go over these a good bit more in class and through exercises and things like that. And the thing about commas, the more you write and the more you read, the better you become at finding them, finding mistakes, and knowing where to insert. All right, so until the next presentation, we'll see you in class.